Pivot from constitutional structure to baseball for a minute, if you will bear with me. Any of your kids play baseball or softball?
Two of our boys had a very brief career in baseball.
Gotcha. Well, it's obviously not as great a sport as football, but we can still call it the American pastime. And I'd like to talk about the Houston Astros, who are miserable cheaters. Sorry, Cornyn and Cruz, but both of the Texas senators sit on this committee. But I think all baseball fans know that the Houston Astros cheat. They steal signs. They bang on cans. They've done a whole bunch of miserable things historically, and they deserve to be punished probably more than they have been. But tonight is Game 4.
Thank goodness the First Amendment protects that right for him to express that erroneous opinion.
If you want to defend cheating, that is certainly the prerogative of the senior senator. And the junior senator from Texas now rushes into the room to do some homerism.
It was going so well.
I noticed that Ted is wearing a Lone Star State flag, but not an Astros mask. Tonight is Game 4 in the American League Championship Series, and if Houston loses to Tampa, they will be done. And that leads people to feel kind of desperate at times, right? There are times when you have a game that's your elimination game. You can imagine people wanting to sort of reconsider anything they can reconsider. The ends might justify the means. And you could imagine that the Houston Astros, who've cheated in lots of ways in the past with sign stealing, might try to go to the umpire and try to persuade somebody to expand the strike zone just for Houston in the game tonight. That would obviously be inappropriate, right?
Right.
We can't have two sets of rules. Well, I think that an umpire is obviously supposed to apply rules fairly to both teams. I think we can all agree on that as rules of fair play. And I think some of what we've seen in the questions over the last 3 days are trying to get an umpire to commit to a different set of rules for different teams. And so for what it's worth, just to reiterate, what I think so many of us have been trying to argue for in these hearings is the alleged equivalency between Republican and Democratic questioning here implies that Republicans have been trying to get you to pre-commit to certain policy outcomes, and I just don't think that that's actually what's been happening in this hearing. I think that the originalism that you've defended and that a lot of us have been advocating for in advance of and during this hearing is not a request for Republican policy positions to be advocated through the courts. It is rather a plea, not just to you and to future nominees, but to our Democratic colleagues as well, to embrace a system where we again distinguish for the American people between the two political branches and the apolitical branch. The fact that you are before us to be confirmed to a lifetime appointment where you will put on a black robe is a liturgical act where you're cloaking your policy preferences in humility. It is obviously the case that we're all shaped by life experiences. It is obviously the case that people have lived in communities in the past, and most people who end up as extraordinary jurists have been connected to or around the political process at different points in their career. But that is not to undermine the ideals we have in the American system that judges should not see themselves as super legislators. They should not see themselves as policy advocates. And they do have to take up this new oath to a greater humility. And it means that you lay down certain freedoms that are inalienably and innately yours prior to becoming a judge so that you don't have the appearance of bias and impropriety in the future. And so I want to reassert the idea that we should be trying to excise from our language this idea of conservative and liberal blocs on the court, Republican and Democrat justices. What we want, and I want this to not just be a Republican aspiration, but I want it to be a Democratic aspiration as well again. What we want are people on the court who understand with humility and modesty, the judicial role, because it is a limited role. It is not a role to right all wrongs in society. It is not a role to be a policy advocate. And I think you've comported yourself extraordinarily well over the last 3 days as you've been repeatedly asked to be an umpire who prejudges certain cases, and it isn't your job to do that until the reactive moment when you're actually on the court. So thank you for the civics lesson that you've offered Americans over the last 3 days. Thank you, Chairman.